So at our last meeting, the board had some questions for us to dive into a little bit further around algebra and the impact of the decisions that we've made on the high school program. And since that time, we've been meeting with our faculty, we've been meeting with each other, and we made some adjustments to our map testing. So I had asked Adam and Josh if they can provide an update for you on where we are in this process. I'm not making a decision today, but we are going to gather some more information based on what we're presenting you this evening to help us in our thinking on how we're ultimately going to recommend we move forward to you next year for all of our 7th graders moving into 8th grade, of which my daughter is a part of that class. So I just want to understand, help parents understand. I have a frame that's a little bit different than just the superintendent up here. Listening to my colleagues share with you our thinking. I actually have a child in the situation that we're talking about for next year, and she'll be experiencing whatever decisions we recommend to moving forward. So, okay, Adam and Josh, thank you again for being here and talking about math. Appreciate it.
My pleasure. Thanks for having us. So the first thing is there's been a lot of conversations about the timeline. So we thought we should lay out a suggested timeline to the board and take any feedback that you might have on it. We'd like to share a proposed model with you tonight. We're going to send a letter to the community updating them tomorrow that we had shared a proposal, and we'll share the proposal with them as well as these slides and a link to where this video will be posted when it's ready to be posted. Take feedback from the community, and by the community I mean faculty, students, parents between 520 and 6'3". We hope to survey parents, assuming we're getting pretty good feedback on the model. We'd like to survey parents and students with regard to some choices that they may have to make. I'll tell you more about that in a minute. And then make a final recommendation to you on June 8th. So the idea here is we're going to share an idea with regard to potential program structure, get some feedback, and then make any revisions that we might have to make and come back to you with our final answer on the 8th. And that'll give us some time before the end of the year to make any placement decisions that we have to make and communicate what we need to with the community. So that's the timeline. So here's a proposal that we'd like to share. The first part is we'd like to continue our commitment to focus on algebra in 8th grade. So algebra focused courses. We'd like to explore the idea of 3 courses, one of them being an extended algebra, one of them an algebra 8, one of them an enriched algebra, kind of by level. And we'll talk about what that means as we go forward with the slide. So, and in terms of placement, we'll place all students in algebra 8, which will be the course that we're running now. And that parents and students can opt out of algebra 8 and they can opt into either the enriched or the extended. That'll be parent and student choice, open enrollment. We'll talk a little bit more about that in just a minute. The choice to go to the enriched algebra, we'll make recommendations based on some data that we have from when we had enriched algebra. So we'll have conversations with parents about if we think that's a good fit in terms of like level of challenge, because we do have some data from students when we had the enriched part of that. We won't be making recommendations for students to go to extended because honestly, we believe that students should go to algebra 8, which is the course that we're running now, but we are proposing that we have that option for parents that feel strongly that that's the best fit for their child. Co-teaching support will be provided in Algebra 8, which we'll talk more about in just a minute. Josh is going to tell us a little bit about the course options.
So the extended algebra program in 8th grade will be the first year of a 2-year algebra sequence. Those students that take that course will take the Regents algebra exam at the end of their 9th grade year, which will be the 2nd year of algebra. So it'll be approximately half of the curriculum taught in the first year, along with building skills that those students need. And those courses will not be co-taught. So the co-taught algebra courses will continue to be the Algebra 8 courses that are in the middle. The thing to mention about the extended algebra for next year is that the state just sent out a memo discussing the extension of the Regents passing scores that for next school year. So students who take a Regents exam at the end of the next school year, whether they're in 8th grade or 9th grade or any grade, the scores, either they could receive an exemption at a lower passing score that can count for graduation. But we can't guarantee that for the following school year after that. The Algebra 8 course will be similar to the Algebra 8 course that we taught this year. It'll go through the New York State algebra curriculum, prepare them for the wide array of high school courses that are available in 9th grade, have differentiation, and I had already mentioned we'll have the co-taught courses in there. For students looking for an additional challenge, the enriched algebra course will follow pace with the Algebra 8 class, but have enrichment tasks within it. So they'll be seeing some problems that might be more challenging. Some of the enrichment that we had previously done in Algebra 8 this year will now be in this enriched algebra class. And that group of students can see that level of enrichment. Here you could see a rough curriculum guide of both of those courses. And so you can see about half of the curriculum in the extended algebra, the full 7 units in Algebra 8, and then enriched algebra, the only additional unit of rational expressions and equations was something that we had always taught in enriched algebra. So adding that back in to the enriched algebra class for 8th grade.
All right, so we just wanted to go through some strengths of the proposal and some potential questions that still linger. Strengths are, we've stuck to our commitment for algebra for all students. We still think that continues to be the best choice for us. All students would complete algebra by the end of 9th grade. Most students would likely complete it by the end of 8th grade. There would be this, feeling of fit, which we heard so much about with regard to choice of level. Teachers would prepare, there'd be less differentiation potentially as they prepare for more homogeneous groups, although we're still going to work hard in that Algebra 8 class to differentiate for a wide variety of student readiness levels. And that it addresses the concerns about Math 9 honors and students potentially dropping or not feeling ready for that course. With regard to some questions that we have, we are going to have to address mobility between levels. That could be challenging based on curriculum, but also based on class sizes. So we can balance the classes likely in a nice way in September, but once students start to move, if they feel like a class is maybe too easy or too challenging, they might have limited opportunities to do that. The distribution of student subgroups, I think, will be fine in Math 8 and enriched, but there is a concern with regard to the makeup of that extended algebra class. We may see a high population of students that have special needs, disabilities, English language learners, perhaps students that are new to the community. And so that we have questions about the makeup of that class and being able to really support them and having peers that are also kind of, pushing that class along in a really positive way. The impact on middle school teaming, we have some things that we need to work out with regard to if students take math off the team and then kind of rejoin their team for the other academic subjects. Section size and balance always gets thrown off when you start, the more options you have. You see that at like Greeley, for example, there's a struggle with balancing because there's choices. So there's some trade-off there. We have to make some decisions about the allocation of our enrichment staff and support staff. So, in terms of where they're spending their time and how they're pushing into these different levels. And also the, obviously parent support for this program and also parents supporting their child in the various choices that they will have to make. So those are some questions that we have to talk through.
So one of the things that we believe strongly about is that students should have as many options as possible when they enter 9th grade at Greeley. So we want to create courses that allow them to go into any of those course options the following year. So the lighter orange are the likely pathways that students would take, right? If you're taking the extended algebra year 1, you would go to the extended algebra year 2. Algebra 8, you'll likely go into geometry or geometry enriched. And if you're in the enriched geometry, likely Math 9 honors or geometry enriched. Those are your likely recommended pathways. But we added these dotted lines because we want to make sure that students in Algebra 8 that are performing really well, that have developed their math abilities over the course of that year, still have that option to be recommended for Math 9 honors. So we just want to make sure that, again, that no student in 8th grade is limited by the course that they take into the course that they are recommended for in 9th grade.
All right, so at the last meeting, the Board of Education had several questions that we needed to explore a little bit further. And so we've done some research. And so we have a few slides answering these questions. We had some questions about how many students dropped, math classes, what impact did open enrollment have on the distribution of students in high school classes, what topics were in enriched algebra that weren't covered in Math 8, could we increase in-school supports, Math AIS, for example, how common is taking algebra in the 8th grade across the larger, across the country, for example, or the state, and how many high school students are tutored. So we've answered, we don't have answers to all of them, but we've answered several of them, and we want to update the board to let you know we heard you, and we did a little bit of work to answer several of those questions. One thing that we did is we made sure all of our students by this point have taken in 8th grade, have taken the MAPS assessment, the NWEA data. So we have this data now. We didn't have it at the last meeting. We have this spring data, that purple line, which we didn't have last time. That's new to this chart. So what you can see here is that the students grew from the fall 21-22, this school year, they grew from a 242 to a 249. So it continues to be, with this spring's data, the strongest program that we have data for in terms of their overall growth. It's challenging to compare that to the 1920. You can't do that because that was the COVID. We were all home at that point. The governor had shut down schools, and so we didn't give it that year. But based on the students' entry point, they didn't grow as much as they did in that program as they did with this new program. So we just wanted to update that data. The norm score is a growth of 5 for the year, and our students this year grew a 6.7, and we pushed that test a little bit earlier just so we'd have data. So it's likely that if we did it at the normal time in June, we would have a small increase from there.
Can I just stop? So can you just go back?
Sorry.
This is like the crux of the conversation, right? So we have a program that we know that's based on our third-party measures, students are growing tremendously, and we're considering making an adjustment to that. Obviously we're really considering doing that, but that's why this is taking such a long time for us to make a decision around, because the data is supporting the current model that we have that's independent of the testimony and the quantitative data that we're receiving from our families, which also is important, but that's why this isn't as easy as maybe people feel it should be, and that's why it's taking more time. But nonetheless, we're going to move forward, and we're going to make a decision and a recommendation to you that we feel is right. But it's going to take us time to do that, but we'll eventually land on a decision that I think is right for all kids based on all of the data points that we have, including parent feedback. All right, sorry, go ahead.
No, it's important. And I think another important part to this is that the program that we have now is still available to all students in this proposal. So if all of our Chapel class students and their parents choose Algebra 8, then we're running the same program. The new part is that now we have options. And the question I think that Dr. Ackerman raises is a really good one. Are those options better than Math 8? And right now our data is really strong, even when we break it down by subgroup. But we do have to take into consideration the other anecdotal information that we're getting. And that's important. So it's by no means an easy decision at all for us. And I appreciate everybody's thinking on it.
So I get to do what I love best, which is talk about some charts and graphs coming up now. So this is showing our fall to spring growth. And you would expect to see most of your students in the average growth. That is the nationally normed expectation of students growing over the course of a year. And we are seeing well over 50% of our students in the high average and the high growth rate this year in 8th grade. And then this graph here is the student achievement by quintile in the fall and their current quintile. And what we're seeing is the trend of we had less students who were high achieving in the fall than they are now, which is showing us that our students are growing at a rate that's higher than average. I do want to point out, we do see that the students in the low quintile are about the same. And that is something that we have been looking at over the course, and we'll see that in the next couple of slides as well. Here, we also looked at course enrollment trends over the last 5 years at Greeley. So the courses that students are choosing when they enter Horace Greeley High School. So the things to notice, I know there's a bunch of bars here, is that the enriched geometry course, you could see this past year is much higher because all students took algebra in eighth grade last year, but that trend has been increasing over time. So the amount of students that have been going into the enriched geometry class has been going up and steadily increasing with a jump when we opened enrollment for students to take enriched algebra. We do also want to note that you could see the enrollment of Math 9 honors had decreased this year, and then the trend obviously for the algebra classes has been decreasing over time.
Yeah, we got 7
Yeah.
years worth of data. Our
7.
pictures covering
Oh,
a couple
yeah,
of the,
right,
the
yeah.
Zoom box there.
The-
But you also see the new courses for this year, that geometry course, and there's a few there that are to the right. The reason we
Right.
don't have multiple years of data is those are new courses based on the
Right.
reconfiguration of the department.
Yeah. So then we also looked at the percentage of students that dropped courses. So we took where students were enrolled in September and where they were enrolled in May, and looked at where they were dropping courses. We do see a higher percentage over the last 2 years in the Math 9 honors students dropping. And then this past year, we saw a higher number of students dropping from enriched geometry to geometry. And I want to point out that high bar for percentage of students that dropped from geometry to one of the algebra courses or the cornerstones courses, we had very few students taking that course. So it was a very low end, but percentage wise, that looks very high. So I just want to make sure that we point that out over there. So that answer is sort of looking at where students are dropping levels or moving from levels in our math courses.
So obviously the high school's concerned about this, and
Yeah.
they shared that with us in our conversation. So that was part of our thinking around offering enriched algebra again. In the conversation is the acknowledgement that whether we offered enriched algebra or not, the percentages may have been the same based on disruption caused through COVID. But nonetheless, the high school strongly advocated for reexamining a differentiated model at the 8th grade level, especially for students who would be enrolling in Math 9 honors. But I think it's fair to say, in representing the conversation that we had with both our math teachers at the middle and high school level, there was strong support for continuing algebra at the 8th grade level. Would you agree with
Yeah,
that?
that's
Yeah.
exactly right.
Okay.
All right, so in tomorrow's letter that I'm going to send out, there's a link to a Federal Department of Education website that has, some information about algebra and the accessibility of algebra and the importance of the accessibility of algebra. So this answers some additional questions. Across the country, 24% of students took algebra across the entire country. This data was from 2018. It was the most recent I could find. It's likely that it's gone up from there. In 8th grade, right? No, in 8th grade, 24% of students took algebra in 8th grade, and that was about 4 years ago. And I think that based on some of the more current research, it's likely gone up since then, but I don't have more recent data. Only 75 districts in the country run Algebra for All, and 70% of schools offer a middle school algebra option. So there's, you can see that 30% don't even offer the option. The picture that you see there, the red is where algebra is not offered. The darker green is, like, darker the green, the higher percentage of students are taking algebra. That dark green is 100%. And I know it's kind of small. It's tough to see. It goes 75%, 50% all the way down to white is 0% of the students that take algebra. So you can kind of see the distribution of students across the country with regard to their access for algebra.
Now, I know there's been questions from parents about, if no one else in our region is offering Algebra for All, well, why would we be doing that? And I appreciate that question. I completely understand that, but I have to share with you, that's never really been our approach here in Chappaqua. We've always made decisions based on research and what we feel is in the best interest of our students, and made adjustments based on feedback from our own data. And I don't know if you would want us to operate in that way here, based on the academic press in this community and the desire for us to be progressive and innovative in our approach here and in our instructional methods. I think that's one of the reasons why people move to our school district. So while I completely appreciate that question and absolutely understand that position, I would say that I feel like it's important that we don't box ourselves into what the region is doing and we think outside of that. And we continue to take advantage of our opportunities here to maybe set a different course that other school districts may one day choose to follow. And so that's how we've always kind of viewed our work, I think, in this district long before I came here. And I think we should continue to view it that way moving forward. Okay, Adam?
Thank you. So along the line of updated websites, I just wanted to re-advertise. We have an Algebra 8 website that has been launched for quite some time now. So we put the bit.ly link there. We've sent letters. We'll send another one tomorrow with regard to updates. There is a feedback form right on the website. It's really important that we get that feedback, that we hear from the community, so that we get a sense of how they're feeling about this potential shift of having these 3 levels. Eventually, we're going to get to a point where Josh and I are going to get out there and provide some opportunities to interact with parents with webinars and things like that. And then we'll have, we're probably, assuming this model gets some traction, we're probably going to ask parents and students what course they might want to sign up for, just so we can get a sense of how students would be distributed across that. And then we can bring that information back to the board on June 8th. So you get a sense of, what courses students are thinking about signing up for. Not that we're having them commit right now, but it would be nice to know, how many sections of each we might run and how that students would be distributed across those 3 courses if we headed in that direction. But at this point, we're not committing to the 3. We'll make that final recommendation on June 8th. So just in terms of the final, this slide we've seen at the beginning, but I just wanted to remind everybody of the timeline. We'll collect some information. We'll be back on the 8th. Certainly we can answer any questions now that you might have, if we have the answers. Otherwise, we'll bring them back on the 8th and make a final recommendation to you. And then that'll give us enough time in June to be able to do some scheduling and let parents, make a final decision with regard to what they sign up for. And we'll have the students in those courses in September.